conversation. That's good to know. With our candidate, Allan Domb. So Allan, welcome. And thank you for joining us. We hope to be hosting a tight 45-minute conversation focused on the issues of what we call holistic development and land use and responses to gentrification that can help people stay in their neighborhoods versus displacing them. So let me just say a quick word about the Growth Collective. Taib Smith, my other partner, Stephen Sanders, and I joined together with a group of 7 experienced Black developers and the end of 2019, so a little over 3.5 years ago, really what we were out of being distressed by what we saw going on in many of what used to be vibrant middle class and working class Black neighborhoods across Philadelphia that were really being disinvested in to a very large extent and being left behind in what was being set up as the new Philadelphia. Lack of resources, the impact of redlining, and many years of disinvestment and neglect from public and private dollars had left these neighborhoods pretty vulnerable, and the loss of anchor institutions, declining home ownership, and disintegrating business corridors. And something needed to be done. If we wanted to see with the largest demographic group in Philadelphia thriving as opposed to disappearing, those being Black Philadelphians, but then we had to have a different approach to development and had to have a different approach to land use. And so the Growth Collective came together around the concept that real estate was a powerful tool to reinvest in and reimagine communities, and that development could be done in a way that, as we call it, is holistic, meaning that it accrues to the health, wealth, and well-being of existing residents as opposed to displacing them. But that would take advocacy, it would take capital, and it would also take empowering community stakeholders with information about what would be the needs and what are the needs in their community and how real estate can best address them. And so the Growth Collective and with our developer members and our allies have begun to work to address and bring forth a different view of development that brings Black and Brown real estate professionals, financial professionals, community leaders, government officials, and others together around this common vision. But to do that best, we need a city government that is both responsive and catalytic in this approach. And that's why we're coming to our candidates for mayor to understand from them how they view their role as leaders, as innovators, and as facilitators of a holistic development approach. And so today's conversation, we are going to have opening statement from our candidate, Allan Domb, of up to 3 minutes. We have a series of questions for him, and there'll be 3 minutes for responses. And that should leave us some time at the end for also questions in the chat from you who are listening and joining in on the conversation. And so with that, I will stop and turn it over to my partner, Taib, to kind of lead us off and allow Allan his opening statement time. So thank you, Taib. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Allan, thank you for making the time to have a more not virtually intimate discussion versus the format of many other forums that we've, as citizens, been exhausted through the process, just like the candidates. I've had the good fortune of having numerous conversations with you about the complexities as a Black entrepreneur, as a real estate professional, and also as someone who is resident of the largest and poorest big city in the nation, which happens to be also one of the most diverse cities in the country. So with a BIPOC population of, I think, approximately 67%, Black people of African descent who represent approximately 40% of the city only make up approximately 2.3% of the business owners. So I think a lot of the, speak frankly, rhetoric about improving these conditions seem to be absent of public policy or initiatives that actually bring investment or transformative change to these issues. So with that level setting, I'd like to allow you time for an opening statement before we dive into the questions.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you, Taib, and thank you, Stephen, also, and everyone here. Thanks for the opportunity. Look, I am running for mayor because Philadelphia is in a crisis. We have a public safety crisis, which is the #1 issue. We have an education, good paying jobs, affordable housing, poverty crisis. But the biggest crisis we have is a crisis of leadership, because these can all be solved with strong leadership. That's really the key, leadership. And look, in the public safety area, I've published a complete comprehensive public safety plan. It's on my website, votedomb.com. You can check it out. I'm not going to go into the details of it. But in my opinion, crime is the symptom of the lack of a good paying job, having a roof over your head, and being in poverty. Education is the cure. And that's why I want to put in place, from kindergarten to 12th grade, the teaching of financial literacy, including home ownership. Can't stress that enough, home ownership. I want to put in place the teaching of technology and entrepreneurship. And Taib, you talked about 2.3%, I believe you said, were Black-owned businesses. And I was up at OIC's old building, the building on Broad Street, maybe 2 months ago, and I saw an article from Leon Sullivan, who said in 1972, Dr. Sullivan said, we have 2 to 3% Black entrepreneurs. We need to do a lot more. And we haven't moved the needle in 51 years, which is a disgrace, okay? It's a disgrace. I always say that you make a living working, you create wealth owning. We need to create more entrepreneurs, a lot more than we have now. So in schools, I want to have that teaching done with financial literacy, technology, home ownership, entrepreneurship, K through 12, but also want to allow students in high school to go to school 4 days a week, and then work on the 5th day in a job, get credit, get paid. In this environment, the employer will probably say, hey, Alan, can you come in Tuesday through Friday after school, 3:30 to 6, and maybe Saturday 9 to 5. We have a labor shortage. We need you to help us. Cristo Rey High School does this. They graduated, I think, last year, 99% of their students, of which 100% were admitted to college. It does work and gets kids off the street. But as far as entrepreneurship, I really want to focus on that because, look, I started my business from scratch. I came here making $15,000 a year, opened my business in 1980, and I had, I created great jobs in the city and built a successful business. But I know how difficult it is to start a business, and I came from basically zero. I wasn't born into a wealthy family. I was born very, very modestly. So entrepreneurship in Philadelphia is difficult for several reasons. One, we double tax all of our businesses, including the small ones. We have the most onerous tax system for small entrepreneurs. We also have the highest wage taxes in the country. We also have an issue of having funding for small entrepreneurs, not just to become a small entrepreneur, but to scale up to the next level. One of the questions I consistently ask is, how many Black-owned businesses employ more than 100 people or 250 people in the city of Philadelphia? Where is the scale up of these small entrepreneurs to get to that level? And then number 3, as far as the city is concerned, doing business with the city is kind of a nightmare, very difficult. I mean, I can't even tell you all the steps you have to go through. We have to simplify the process of doing business with the city, especially for small owned businesses. We have to cut back on the insurance requirements and bonding requirements for smaller owned businesses to make it easier to do business with the city. We have some of the lowest formation of Black and brown entrepreneurs on the East Coast of any major city. So that we have to simplify the processes in the city. So that's my kind of overview. And look, I've spent over 40 years in the private sector and almost 7 years on council. And I've learned a lot from that experience. So I'm happy to answer any questions today and look forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Alan. And thank you for mentioning Dr. Leon Sullivan. I added in the link one of his books. It's called Build, Brother, Build. And to your point, we have not moved the needle since in 1969 when he wrote that book in terms of Black and brown business ownership. I should also mention that he created selective patronage. At that time, the Philadelphia business ecosystem was not hiring Black businesses, and he got 500 clergymen around the country, around the city, to make a policy that if you couldn't work at a place, you wouldn't spend money there. So that boycott actually moved the needle in regards to Black home ownership and Black business. So my first question is, within your administration, if you're fortunate enough to become the next mayor of the city, what policies would you implement in regards to real estate as to be a vehicle to benefit predominantly Black neighborhoods versus displacement and to low and middle income Black families and taxpayers, which seems to be the norm?
Right. There's a couple things we need to do. I think, first of all, we need to change the processes that we have in the city as far as opportunities for people to benefit from some of the programs the city offers. Many people don't know about any of the programs the city has, whether it's the senior program, the senior citizen program, the loop program for long-term owner occupants. We have all these programs, but no one knows anything about them. You know, I passed a bill called the wage tax bill that reimburses 800 to 1,000 people their wage taxes. 60,000 families qualify, 200,000 people qualify, yet no one, I think, well, actually no one, 2,500 people applied out of the potential that could apply. So we have to make those programs available. As far as the gentrification, what we really need to do is look at how we're assessing real estate values. Many of these values are not assessed correctly, because if you have an abated property in your neighborhood, the value of the one next door is not the same value as an abated property, and there's a percentage discount that I don't believe we've applied correctly. And the other piece is, I don't know if you're aware that we leave $450 million on the table of federal and state benefits that residents have no idea about. 450 million. 100 million of it is in earned income tax credits. 230 million is in medical assistance for lower income people and seniors. We also leave in what's called SNAP, formerly known as food stamps, 100 million, and the earned income tax credit. Companies like Benefits Data Trust actually have programs where you can put your name, your income in, your dependents, and they can tell you exactly what you qualify for. Last year, we invested a small amount of money with BDT, but for every dollar we invested, we got back $10 to $12 of federal and state benefits. I think we need to ramp that up dramatically. As far as the gentrification of the city, many of these issues are that people are not aware of the programs. We have to get those programs into their hands. And I think it should be like an automatic process through the computer system. It shouldn't be that they have to inquire. We should be able to make these programs available. As far as scaling up entrepreneurs, I believe we should look at investing some of our pension money into some of these new startup potential businesses, because the best thing I've ever learned is invest in yourself. Why the pension fund would not invest in small Black and brown entrepreneurship in the city is beyond my imagination. I would invest in some of the funds too, because it's not just the investing and the return of the money. It's the amazing benefit we get from investing in these businesses that are in the city, where the employees and the employers will pay us taxes. We get a double hit here. It makes sense for us to invest in ourselves, and it raises people out of poverty.
Thank you.
Alan, thank you for that. We'll go on to our next question. And again, our focus is largely around the issues of land use and development, and how that is promoting economic growth and wealth creation in particularly Black neighborhoods, but other marginalized neighborhoods. This question goes to the land bank, which there's been a lot of conversation about, a lot of criticism of. The city has approximately 40,000 empty lots, with 8,000 of them being city owned. What policy measures would you implement to use the land bank? Would you keep the land bank? Would you use the land bank? How would you use it to implement and use real estate to promote the economic growth and stability in Black neighborhoods?
I'm a fan of actually utilizing the land bank to leverage for affordable housing, whether it's through nonprofits or private development. The city can't do it. We're going to have a shortage in 2030 of 30,000 affordable homes we'll need in the city. We need private development and nonprofits. I would unload as much of that land bank property as possible. I'm not sure why we're sitting on it. It's not doing anything for us. It's costing us around 15 to 20 million a year to maintain. It makes no sense to me why we're holding on to it. We have the ability as the government to leverage that land into what we want to accomplish for our residents, which is affordable housing. You know, I don't know if you know this, when I was 12 years old, well, we had no hot water. I lived in an apartment building, 800 square feet, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath. The rent was $100 a month. We had no hot water for 2 weeks. My mother calls the landlord, who hung up on her on a Sunday. He lived in Lower Merion. And then the next day she calls the mayor, which is a volunteer job, and where I lived. We got hot water. About a week later, we got evicted with a 30-day notice. So I understand about not having a roof over your head. We had no place to go. I think it's important to utilize the city's assets to leverage that into affordable housing.
Thank you for that answer.
Thank you for that, Allan. So my next question is, Black and Hispanic real estate developers represent 0.56% of the total number of private US developers and only 5% of owners in the real estate industry as a whole, according to a new study. The study estimates there are 112,000 private real estate developers nationwide and a total of 447 Black and 175 Hispanic developers. How would you propose using city-owned assets and procurement contracts in order to diversify the real estate ecosystem?
We probably have to make sure it's legal. We'd have to make sure that we could leverage into Black and brown ownership a lot of these lots if we can possibly do that. Or we do it by maybe we allocate X amount to smaller entrepreneurs. We'd have to figure out a way to do it so it's legal, but I'd want to leverage that up. And I think, I also think a good way to do this, Taib, is to have the pension fund directly invest in private funds of Black and brown entrepreneurs throughout the city and actually let the funds do the investing. I think that would be much more productive for the city's perspective. I learned about a fund recently, I think that returns like 7%. And the last time I checked with the city's pension fund, that's in the range of what the city's monies were getting from outside sources. So I want to go back to this point. If we're getting a similar return and not investing our money in the city of Philadelphia, why wouldn't we be investing in the city of Philadelphia, getting the same return, but also getting the return of taking people out of poverty, helping our local residents, helping Black and brown entrepreneurs scale up? I think that's really important. Let me go back to something else I mentioned earlier, and that's scaling up small entrepreneurs. We don't have a lot of big companies in the city that are owned by Black or brown people. We just don't. I mean, I don't know if you can name 5 companies that have more than 200 or 300 employees that are owned by Black or brown people. I can't name them. And so one of the things we need to focus on, how do we select 30, 40, or 50 smaller entrepreneurs, and how do we figure out how to scale them up? Because I think you build a whole ecosystem. When you can get a company that's 200 people or 300 people, and that company sells out, a lot of those partners within that company receive benefits and then start their own business, which creates this whole ecosystem in the Black and brown community. I think that's really has to be a strategic goal we have to shoot for.
Thank you. And before you jump in, Sandra, I just need to make a comment. So, Allan, less than 3% of all venture capital money as yet to date invested has gone to people of color and women writ large, right? And of the money managed, private money managed in the United States, in total, only 1% of that money is invested with Black money managers. So I have to say, when you mentioned we have to check if it's legal, if we look back historically at the number of things that were legal to exclude and oppress and keep people out of the contemporary economy, it's structural racism that we always have to push back to. I just have to mention that legality and percentages often deny the reality of structural racism.
Right. Well, I'll give you an example though, Tate. What I'm thinking about is, I think you guys have a fund. I think Della Clark has a fund. I think other people, Sylvester Mobley has a fund. I think we should be investing in those funds. That's my opinion, because those funds, as I understand them, correct me if I'm wrong, are paying in that 6 to 7% range. And so if we're getting 6 or 7% from outside investments, why are we not doing those investments in the city and helping our own people grow, like investing in ourselves?
Agreed.
And I want to take this opportunity to highlight the 7 Black development companies that are part of the collective, because there are companies defying the odds who still need support to grow from that small or even sometimes mid-sized companies into the next phase, which is, again, mainly comes down to opportunity and access. But the Mosaic Development with Leslie Smallwood Lewis, Anthony Miles of TPP Holdings, Anthony Fallard, West Carlton Developers, Leon Caldwell of Ujima Developers, Kyle Easley and Brahim Murray of BKP Developers, Lorraine Wilson Drake and Anthony Drake of Wilson Drake, Taib Smith, who we've been talking with, of Smith and Roller, and our advisors, Steve Lawrence, Amani Hamilton, and Randall Drain. So I just want to lift them up as business people and company owners who again are out here struggling every day to grow after maintaining their businesses from anywhere from 5 to almost 20 years, but still find many barriers in terms of having access to the opportunities that are more likely available to their counterparts who are not African-American companies. So again, just looking at those companies that already exist as we bring new ones on board. Allan, you touched on one of the other questions we've had, so around the how we grow Black and brown businesses. So I'm going to skip to something else that came out recently, which was a report from the Economy League of Philadelphia that says that Philadelphia's Black population is declining and the income growth for Black households is stagnant. White, Asian, and Latino household median incomes grew by 22% or more, while Black household income grew by less than 6%. As the city's chief executive officer, what is your specific plan to close this income gap in the public and private sector?
So I'm going to give a detailed answer on this, okay? I'm gonna go back to what I said earlier, which is we have this policy in the city of double taxation and the highest wage taxes of any city in the country. But we double tax small, medium, and large businesses. When you look at our overall business structure in the city of Philadelphia, of the top 20 employers, only 3 are private sector: Comcast, American Airlines, and Allied Security. 3. Everything else is eds and meds. When you look at all jobs created from 2009 to 2018 in the United States that paid less than $35,000, the percentage was 29%. When you look at jobs created that paid less than $35,000 in Philadelphia, the percentage was 60.5. We're double. We're basically creating double the poverty level jobs of every other location. The U.S. is 29%. We're at 60.5. When you look at jobs that pay 35 to 100,000, which is the good growth income jobs, we're half of our suburbs. Just drive out to Conshohocken, Valley Forge, King of Prussia, Malvern, Devereux, and see what's going on. It's like booming out there. Then when you look at the policies of taxation across the country for small, medium, and large businesses and entrepreneurs, the local and state business taxes in New York City are the highest at 16.2. The second highest is Philadelphia at 15.9. And the third highest in the country is California at 8.8. Chicago's 7, Boston's in the 7 range, Atlanta is 4, we're 15.9. We did a study when I was in council that if we eliminated the net income of the BERT, which is about 5.9 now, reduced with my bill I had in May of last year, if we took the 5.9 down to 0 over the next 10 years, we would create 100,000 good paying jobs that pay $35,000 to $100,000. Right now, we're a city of producing low paying jobs. And those low paying jobs don't have an increase in value. We need to fix that issue. That's a real problem. It's a structural problem in the city.
Thank you for that. Tahi?
I'm going to do a bit of an audible, Sandra. Allan, what you just said about the nonprofits in the region, particularly our anchor institutions, yes or no, do you support pilots, payment in lieu of taxes?
I'm not sure if I would support pilots or services in lieu of taxes. I'm almost in many cases I'd have to study that issue. I don't have a direct answer on that. You know, in the past, I've always felt that thank God they're here, okay? And I don't want to chase them out to the suburbs like we've chased. Look at who we've chased out of the city.
Allan, how's you gonna chase University of Pennsylvania out of the city with a $20 billion endowment that doesn't have a pathway for mothers and fathers who have children at 52nd Street who can't find a path to benefiting from Drexel or Penn?
Well, let me say this. They've opened already in King of Prussia, a children's hospital branch. They've opened in the suburbs, all types of branches. I'm not saying I'm against any of these things. I just would want to look at it. In some ways, I think services in lieu of taxes are important, but also what is important is making sure that any for-profit businesses on their campus are being taxed. That's step one. We have a lot of for-profit businesses on their campuses across all universities that aren't being taxed correctly. So step one would be look at all the different types of companies that are there that are for-profit and make sure they're taxed.
Thank you.
And just to follow up on that, Allan, there are some models of this service in lieu of taxes that have that some other anchor institutions in other cities have taken on. I think one of the things that would be of particular concern is that those services benefit the surrounding communities.
Right.
We have University of Penn right in the heart of West Philadelphia, and some of the most struggling schools and neighborhoods in those communities that are lacking resources. And so how are these anchor institutions tied to where they are? And really looking at that, and again, how we benefit and support the residents, in these core communities that often get overlooked. Because oftentimes those services, and if you ask them, they'll say they're already making great investments in Philadelphia, but the question is to what end and to whose benefit. So just something to think about.
I do like the services in lieu of taxes model, but I want to look at both first before I give you a definitive answer.
Let me turn to another controversial topic, and that is the issue of the tax abatement program. And there's been a lot of criticism of it and calling for ending it. And I know council has taken some means to curtail it. But as we've heard from one of our developers who was very successful at bringing high quality rental apartments into the neighborhoods we're most concerned about and making them affordable to residents in those neighborhoods, working people in those neighborhoods, they use the tax abatement program to make their financial model work and make those apartments and make their construction affordable, and then to make that operation affordable. Would you support, and this is another yes or no, would you support a targeted tax abatement program if it were targeted to those communities that we've been focused on, underserved Black and Brown neighborhoods, and that those abatements were most focused on bringing affordable housing or other amenities to the existing residents? Would you support that kind of tax abatement program?
I'm going to answer yes, but I'm also going to give you an example of what I did do. One of my first year in council, I actually introduced a bill to provide for homes under 250,000, who I thought needed it the most, an extended time period on the tax abatement, a bigger abatement for homes under 250, because it really should be our collective goal to get more and more people into home ownership. 95% of the wealth in the U.S. are in people's homes. The average wealth of a tenant, I think, is $4,000 to $6,000, while the average wealth of a homeowner is close to $200,000. And we are slipping in home ownership in the city right now. So we need to encourage it. So the answer is yes. I will give you another example of where I would suggest we utilize it. We're going to have a lot of empty office buildings, unfortunately. And to convert those empty buildings into housing, we might need to use it in that case. I don't think we need it for $1 million, $2 million, or $3 million type homes, but I do think we need it for specific targeted areas, lower income housing, affordable housing, and possibly these office buildings are going to be shuttered.
Well, thank you for that answer. Something else that we would ask you to look at is we've been learning about programs that help tenants become homeowners, tenant equity vehicles, where there's opportunities with, again, forward-thinking developers to allow tenants to gain and build equity as they are renters and then move into homeownership, because we're also closing off the pathways from being a renter to being a homeowner in many of Philadelphia neighborhoods. So just something else for you to think about as you're pondering your administration.
I think that's a great idea, by the way. I think that's a great idea.
We have an opportunity now and some time for questions from the chat. And I do see people have been putting a couple of questions in the chat.
Yeah, I'll just shoot one out. Steve Bertel asked, would you commit to commissioning a new study on pilots should you become mayor?
Absolutely, yeah, I want to look at that. I want to look at every option. Okay. I want to leave anything unturned.
Okay. Judith Robinson asked for you to speak to your record in terms of Black employees and your term in council, some of your successes.
So I will say this, I don't know if you know, Danilo Burgos worked for me in council when I first started, and I then supported him to become a state representative. Lowell Gerbach worked for me. I had several people working for me. I supported Nicole Marquis, who started from scratch, Hip City Veg. On my campaign, I have a very diverse campaign, LGBTQ member, who's the campaign manager, who's Black. I mean, I have across the board. I've had people in my real estate office that were Black and brown. I've had people, I'm a big supporter of Cristo Rey. For 7 years now, I've supported probably 56 young people and giving them opportunities. And many of them I've given jobs after they graduated high school or college or during college. In fact, one of them I saw the other night, who I helped mentor and helped him get a job. He's now working, I think, for Binswanger Commercial Real Estate. So there's been several. I'm not going to go through all the names, but there've been several. I don't talk about it all the time, but there have been a lot.
Thank you.
And I invite folks to continue to put questions in the chat. In the meantime, Allan, I'd like to raise a question with you. I know you've had a lot of interactions with banks, given your nickname as the condo king here in Philadelphia. There have been some criticisms about banks and the Community Reinvestment Act. And given the changes in neighborhoods, given gentrification, a lot of what banks are taking credit for under CRA are really no longer going to where they're intended. Again, helping underinvested neighborhoods, and particularly folks who have been locked out through systemic racism, Black and brown homeowners, business owners get access to fair access to loans, equitable access to loans, that still is not happening. What would be your approach to dealing with banks in the region in terms of correcting some of that and refocusing the CRA to how it's intended?
Well, first, I would probably engage both of you to help with that, number one. And number two, I have the ability, I believe, to call these banks together in a meeting and bring them together and discuss these issues and figure out a solution. I think the best way to do this is to bring everyone together to get that resolution. But I also think they have to invest more in our neighborhoods. And look, I've toured 52nd and Market and 60th and Market business corridors. I've toured Germantown Avenue below Erie. These business corridors are in terrible shape. They need traumatic help. And that's just 3 out of many in the city. But I would bring them together and say, look, we need to do a couple things. Investing in the business corridors, investing in entrepreneurs, Black and brown entrepreneurs, and tell me the programs you're going to offer Philadelphia residents for home ownership. I want to keep coming back to home ownership because I think it's really key. I know many people who started their own businesses because they owned a home and they borrowed against the home in a home equity or some format like that. Home ownership is key. And for me, one of my goals would be, how do we increase home ownership dramatically over the next time period in order to increase it over 55, 60%? We should have every program possible, including seeing if they can offer mortgage buy downs to make the rates, make the loans more affordable. Maybe the city offers a purchase of the buy down. You know, I was working with the city council back in April of last year when they were going to do a program for $250,000 homes and give a $75,000 soft second for 12 years, and that would wipe out. It would be tax money to get the payments down. I recommend we use the FHA program where you can buy down the loan, cost about 6% of the loan amount, which would have been $15,000. Given the same, would give the home buyer a cheaper mortgage payment, and they would have an assumable loan they could sell down the road that would be valuable to the property. Instead of selling it at 6%, they'd be selling it maybe 4.25 or 4.5. So there's a lot of tools we can use to make homeownership more affordable and to help.
Gerald Jones has a question, and he asks to follow up on the bank question. There's been proposed city-owned sponsored bank to focus on minority lending. What's your perspective on a city-owned or sponsored bank?
That always worries me, anything to a degree, that when the city steps into things that they're not really good at. I kind of feel in general the city should stay with delivering the basic services. But on the flip side, I think the city should do an investment into the funds and let those professionals who are so much better at this than probably the people the city would hire to run this bank. I think I would rather make the city be the investor and put up the pension fund money to get to the same goal.
Thanks. I'm going to ask a question. Allan, you came to politics, let's say later in your career. What are some things that you learned as a businessman once you joined council? Part one. Part two, this is the longest and feels like the longest mayoral and most competitive of my adult life. The second part is, what have you learned as a candidate running for mayor? So part one, what did you learn as a council person coming in as a business person? And then part two, what have you learned as a candidate?
What I learned is coming into council, I came from I was fortunate, I had a pretty successful career in the private sector. So what I learned coming in is to do all the work and give out the credit. That was a very successful tool for me to do the work, be a workhorse, and give the credit to my colleagues. And they would work with me even further when I did it. I learned that as a valuable lesson. I also learned when you're in the private sector, you can make up your decision and move on it. And in the public sector, you need to build a coalition of people to work with you on that issue. And you need to, it's building people and convening people and getting them to move with you in that same direction. That's a very important difference between private sector and public sector. And I also learned that many people make decisions based on the election and the next election. And most of my decisions, once I was elected, were not about the next election. I always would make the decision based on what I thought was best for the future of the city. Because yes, I'd like to be reelected, but that wasn't my most important goal. My most important goal was to do what was right for the city. As far as the campaign is concerned, what I learned about in the campaign is that I think we have, a competitive field. I think that it's been a real workout for many of us because there's been so many forums, almost daily, sometimes 2 or 3 a day. And I think that what I've also learned is that, a former mayor said to me, they'd watched many of the forums, and he said, Allan, all the candidates running are politicians, and you're talking about governing. And, I kind of like that because that's how I am. I want to fix the problems. I want to fix what we know is broken. I'm not doing this for the ego of it. I'm doing it to get the right outcomes. I have several goals that I want to accomplish. And, hopefully I'm elected, but I will make the right decisions from day one for the people of the city. Like, I'm beholden to no one, but I'm accountable to all.
Thank you.
And Allan,
Go ahead.
sorry, we do have another question in the chat from Steve Bertel. Many up and coming Black and Brown developers want to seek out consideration for public-private partnerships. And okay, then if somebody moved my, forgive me, somebody moved my questions pop in. Consideration public-private partnerships with the city and capital projects that can provide a steady project flow and notoriety. Many have been turned away due to perceived convoluted bureaucracy and unclear standards. Can you speak on how, as mayor, you would make efforts to ensure local Black developers are fully considered for large capital projects?
Other than having my word, you have my word, I would consider it, but I'm curious, were they turned away by the city or by the district council people?
It's not stated by, and maybe people could answer in the chat, that's not stated. It just says they seek out consideration for these partnerships, and then the bureaucracy gets in the way.
So here's one of the issues, and I understand that. I think the issue here is the process in the city is so complicated that for smaller projects especially, we have to reduce the requirements, whether it's for bonding or insurance or all these other things. We have to make it a lot easier for small Black and brown entrepreneurs to engage with the city. Right now, it's pretty complicated. I mean, I can't tell you the process you have to go through when I was in government. It's very complicated. We have to simplify these things. And it gets to a point where the city doesn't pay people like within 3 to 6 months, and small businesses can't have that kind of float. In my own private business, we pay within 2-3 weeks. And I've always come from this perspective. When you pay people immediately, they want to work for you and you get a better price. When you take 3 to 6 months, which we do as a city, to pay people, some even 9 months. There was a CDC out in West Philadelphia I was at a few weeks ago. They were telling me hadn't gotten a payment since October. That price that they're offering is factored into the fact that they have to become a bank. So I think there's a lot of things we could do to make it easier to do business with the city. Right now, it's kind of difficult. I actually think we should put timeframes into everything. And I learned this lesson when I did the legislation for the outdoor dining. I put in that outdoor dining legislation, the city had to approve every application within 3 days. And the city approved 862 applications in 3 days. So I would put timeframes, not just in legislation, in the processes of like a zoning change, 90 days, opening a new business, 45 days. We need timeframes so people in the private sector have an expectation of how long it will take.
Thank you. Mr. Banks has a question. He asks, based on what they've done for the city, which person in city government or fellow mayoral candidate do you have the most respect for?
Are you talking about people running for office right now, or people just in government?
I think he's speaking to people running for office right now.
Actually, he gives either choice. I have respect for all the candidates, so I'm not going to say one or the other. And I would say I respect them all. I think there's a lot of good candidates. I think there's a lot of good candidates running for council. I think there's a lot of good people working in the city right now. I can tell you my relationships have been good with many of the people in city departments who really care about the city. So I think there's a lot of good people across the board. I don't think we always get to acknowledge them, but I think what we also need to do is improve on our hospitality, on how we deal with the public as a city government.
Well, Allan, we are coming up against the time that you committed for, and want to give you time for like a 2-minute closing statement as we wrap up. We appreciate the time you've given and your candor in answering the questions. How would you like to wrap up this session?
I'll just say this is a turning point election. I'm running for mayor because I feel I can provide the leadership, which is the most important. What's lacking right now, leadership. That is the most important thing we need to do as a city. The strong leadership can get the public safety under control, and public safety is our #1 issue. You are not going to have people living in the city if they don't feel safe. Last year, 52% of the people in Philadelphia thought about moving. That's not positive. We need to get public safety under control. But in the long term, we need to provide a better education pathway for all of our students in the city, including the teaching of financial literacy, K-12, technology, and entrepreneurship. If we had done this 15 years ago, we'd have a different city today. We need to start doing it now. Other cities, I noticed recently, are just starting to do what I've been talking about for a few years now and have not been able to get the school district to implement. As mayor, you control the school board, and we can get that to be implemented. I think that's very important. But I'm running for office because I feel city needs this leadership. This is a turning point election, and I can provide that leadership, especially based on the fact that I've been in the private sector for many years, built a business from scratch, hired many people, and then I've worked in council for almost 7 years. And no one has that experience of working in both sectors. And my ability to bring people together to resolve the big issues, I think, is my best asset. And I like to help the city. And I go back to a quote from Winston Churchill. We make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give. And for me, this is my opportunity to give back to the city I love and to try to help us get to a much better place.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, thank you very much. And thank you for spending the time. And again, thank you for your candor, the information. To all of you who attended, thank you for your attention and your questions. We invite you to join us tomorrow. We are going to have our next conversation with the candidate at 11 a.m. with Jeff Brown. And so we hope you will tune in then. And again, Allan, good luck. And hopefully we will talk to you soon.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Take care.
You too. Thanks.